At 5:30 in the morning, on December 16, 1944, the largest artillery barrage the Western Front had seen since D-Day fell on the Ardennes. It fell on American positions along an 85-mile front. It destroyed telephone lines, cut radio communications, collapsed foxholes, and announced to every soldier who experienced it that something catastrophic was about to happen. On a wooded ridgeline outside the Belgian village of Lanzerath, a place of 23 houses and a church, near the critical road junction of the Losheim Gap, 18 American soldiers felt the ground shake beneath their foxholes.
They were not combat infantrymen. They were the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment, 99th Infantry Division. INR platoons were not meant to be frontline soldiers. Their job was to stay in the shadows and carry out reconnaissance patrols to gather information about the enemy's strength and positions. However, the front was so undermanned that Bouck's INR platoon was needed to hold the line. Their commander was First Lieutenant Lyle J. Bouck, Jr. He was 20 years old. December 16 was the day before Lyle Bouck's 21st birthday. Coming at them through the fog were 500 German paratroopers, veterans of the 9th Parachute Regiment, 3rd Parachute Division, elite soldiers, part of the spearhead of the entire German 6th Panzer Army's plan to reach the Meuse River and ultimately Antwerp. It was kind of like a manslaughter, remembered platoon leader Lyle Bouck. He was not describing what the Germans did to his men. He was describing what his men did to the Germans.
The Ardennes in November and December 1944 was considered by Allied command a quiet sector. The terrain was difficult: dense forest, steep ridges, narrow roads, and the Germans, it was assumed, were in no position to mount a major offensive. The front was held by a mixture of tired divisions that needed rest and inexperienced divisions that needed a quiet introduction to combat. The troops of the 99th Infantry Division, who lacked battle experience, were deployed to the Ardennes in November 1944. Among the units was the 394th INR Platoon, consisting of well-trained soldiers who had been selected because they were expert marksmen and in peak physical condition. Some of the men were college-educated and were former members of the U.S. Army's abruptly terminated ASTP program. They had been in Europe less than 2 months. They had not yet fought in a major battle. Usually, an INR platoon is made up of 25 soldiers, but since some of his men were needed at regimental operations and regimental headquarters, Bouck's INR platoon was down to 18 men when it was sent to Lanzerath. Their assigned position covered a 5-mile gap in the front line, the gap between two corps, a gap that was supposed to be patrolled by jeep rather than defended by infantry. The village lay at a critical road junction in the northern part of the Losheim Gap. This area was the only road network that could support a military advance through the region. Bouck took the position seriously. He had his men dig their foxholes deep and camouflage them carefully. He positioned his machine guns for maximum coverage of the open ground below the ridge. He acquired additional automatic weapons. Bouck took his job seriously. He and his men dug in deeper, reinforcing their foxholes. He acquired extra automatic weapons, improving their firepower.
He also requested artillery support, pre-registered fires on the obvious approaches to his position. He did not receive them. His position was outside the 99th Division's boundary, and artillery support was needed elsewhere. 18 men, 5 miles of front, no artillery, no armor support, no neighboring units, and 500 German paratroopers on the other side of the border.
After the artillery barrage lifted, the fog lay thick over Lanzerath. In his foxhole on the ridge, Bouck peered through the trees and saw something that made his stomach drop. The German paratroopers now began to cross the fields in the thick snow, right in front of the dugouts. Bouck realized that he was outnumbered by as much as 20-1. Private Risto Milosevic exclaimed, "My God, the whole German army is here." Bouck radioed regimental headquarters. He described what he was seeing. Hundreds of German infantry, in the open, advancing directly toward his position. Bouck informed regimental headquarters of his situation and asked what he should do. Stay or pull back and reinforce a larger force. As Bouck later recalled, the answer was loud and clear. Hold at all costs. Hold at all costs. With 18 men.
Bouck made the decision that defined the entire battle. He held his fire. The platoon held fire until the enemy was within 75 yards, then unleashed coordinated volleys from M1919 30 caliber machine guns, Browning automatic rifles, BARs, and M1 rifles, battering the lead elements of the assault and forcing the survivors to seek cover. 75 yards, less than the length of a football field, close enough to see faces. Close enough that accuracy was almost secondary. The concentrated fire of 18 expert marksmen, firing simultaneously at point-blank range into a column of soldiers advancing in the open, produced exactly the effect that the men of the 394th INR platoon had trained for. The first German assault was shattered. 18 men put up devastating fire against the first attack of over 500 German paratroopers.
The German paratroopers were not cowards. They were elite soldiers. The 9th Parachute Regiment had been selected and trained as part of Germany's best remaining infantry force, committed to the spearhead of what Hitler intended as his war-winning offensive. They attacked again, and each time they came across the same open ground, in the same snow, toward the same wood line that concealed the same 18 Americans who had already beaten them back twice. The German troops conducted a frontal attack on the wooded ridgeline, but were repelled by the small number of American soldiers. A second attack suffered the same outcome. The German troops did not advance. They did not know what strength or capability the American troops had. This was the key. The German commanders on the ground did not know that the wood line was held by 18 men. Their experience, every assault had been repelled by heavy, accurate, coordinated fire, told them that the position was strongly held. Their training told them that a position defended by that volume of fire must contain a significant force.
At one point during the battle, a development occurred that could have ended everything, and demonstrated both the courage and the specific qualities of Bouck's men. A German officer walked into the open, completely exposed, apparently attempting to assess the American position and perhaps signal a ceasefire or surrender. He was close enough that Bouck could see him clearly. One of Bouck's best marksmen, Private James Fort, had the officer in his sights. A clean shot. Certain kill. Fort hesitated. He could not bring himself to shoot an exposed, apparently unarmed man. Bouck gave the order. Fort did not fire. The German officer returned to his lines. The next assault came. It is one of the moments in the Lanzerath Ridge battle that does not resolve cleanly. An act of mercy that cost lives, and a human moment embedded in the record of a day of extraordinary violence.
Throughout the battle, Bouck made repeated attempts to get help. He radioed headquarters, he described the German forces, he requested artillery, he requested that the armored units supporting his position remain in place. Each request failed. At 8000, the infantry advanced. Bouck and his men quickly found themselves cut off from help. The armored units supporting them had withdrawn in the face of the German bombardment. Lines of communication had been cut by the barrage. The artillery never came. He gave the coordinates, but the artillery never came since he and his men were outside of the 99th Division boundary, and artillery support was needed elsewhere. The armor withdrew. The units to their north and south were either under heavy attack themselves or had pulled back in the face of the German offensive. 18 men were alone on a ridge, 8 miles from the nearest friendly unit, holding a position that the entire weight of a German panzer corps needed to cross.
Wave after wave of German paratroopers charged the ridgeline, and the 18 soldiers of Bouck's platoon mowed them down with brutal efficiency. They planned to fight to the last bullet, buying their brothers time. That's because, though they were outnumbered 15-1 by the elite German paratroopers, an even more menacing force was pulling up behind them, the 1st SS Panzer Division, which was the leading edge of the northern attack of the German 6th Panzer Army. The stakes were not just the ridge. They were the entire northern shoulder of the Battle of the Bulge. If the Losheim Gap opened freely, Kampfgruppe Peiper, the armored spearhead that would later carry out the Malmedy massacre, could have reached the Meuse River hours earlier. The entire German timetable depended on movement through the gap that 18 Americans were blocking. By late afternoon, the Germans had been repelled multiple times, but they had time, numbers, and ultimately the ability to find angles that 18 men simply could not cover. The Germans finally flanked the American forces at dusk, capturing them. Only one American, a forward artillery observer, was killed, while 14 were wounded. German casualties totaled 92. The arithmetic of the day: 18 Americans, 1 killed, 14 wounded, 500 German paratroopers, 92 confirmed casualties, with estimates ranging significantly higher. And the German paratroopers had been held for nearly a full day. On the third attack, Bouck and his men were captured. They were taken to a cafe in Lanzerath that had become a German headquarters. It was there that an encounter occurred that was documented by multiple survivors, and later confirmed in Robert Kershaw's historical account. A German colonel arrived, furious at the delay his advance had suffered. He demanded to know what had held up his force for the entire day. His subordinate told him an entire American regiment had been holding the ridge. When Bouck and his captured men were brought in and counted, 18 Americans and 4 artillery observers. The German officer, by the accounts of survivors, stared at them in disbelief. Once Bouck and his men were taken prisoner, and the German paratroopers searched the woods, they learned that less than a platoon had stopped them. The German officer, described as wearing a long black leather coat, was later believed to be Joachim Peiper himself, the same Peiper whose Kampfgruppe had been waiting behind the parachute regiment for hours, unable to advance because 18 Americans were blocking the road.
First Lieutenant Lyle Bouck spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of the Germans. When he was liberated and the war ended, he went home with the conviction that he had failed. Lyle Bouck considered the wounding of most of his men and the capture of his entire unit a failure. When the war ended 5 months later, the platoon's men, who were split between 2 prisoner-of-war camps, just wanted to get home. Quote, "I felt like what I did was a failure," Bouck declared many years afterward. He did not know, could not have known, as a captured lieutenant in a German prisoner-of-war camp, what his platoon's stand had actually accomplished. It was only after the war that Bouck learned that his platoon had prevented the lead German infantry elements from advancing and had delayed by about 20 hours their armored units' advance. Just after midnight, German Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper arrived in Lanzerath. He had been delayed by horrendous road traffic, blown bridges, and the tenacious defensive operations by the units of the 394th Infantry Regiment, including the INR platoon. Irate at the lack of progress, Peiper ordered his force forward at about 400, some 18 hours behind schedule. The delay altered the crucial timetable for Peiper and other panzer units. This situation allowed the U.S. Army valuable time to counter the German main thrust in the north. 18 hours. 18 men. 18 hours of delay, purchased at the cost of 1 American dead and 14 wounded, that gave the northern shoulder of the Allied line time to stabilize,
that contributed to the failure of the German offensive to achieve its objectives, that helped determine the outcome of Hitler's last major gamble in the West. And the United States Army did not recognize them for it for 37 years.
On October 26, 1981, after considerable lobbying, a congressional hearing, and letter writing by Bouck, every member of the unit was finally recognized for their valor that day, making the platoon the most decorated American unit of its size of World War II. He had not failed. He had held at all costs.
The 18 men of the 394th INR platoon were not a special operations unit. They were not airborne. They were not rangers. They were intelligence and reconnaissance soldiers from a division that had been in Europe less than 2 months, many of them college students who had been in the Army's education program before the program was cut and they were sent to the front. Private Risto Milosevic exclaimed, "My God, the whole German army is here." Milosevic's line captures something essential about the experience of December 16th at Lanzerath. He was not wrong. A battalion of German paratroopers, with the full armored weight of a panzer corps behind them, was, in the functional sense that mattered to 18 men in foxholes, the whole German army. And they held anyway.
On May 12, 2005, veterans of the 99th Infantry Division and local citizens of Lanzerath, Belgium, dedicated a monument composed of a small brass plaque alongside a bench and a United States flag to commemorate the fight on the grassy hill overlooking the village. A small brass plaque, a bench, a flag on a hill in Belgium, for a stand that delayed the spearhead of Germany's last major offensive by 18 hours. For 92 German casualties inflicted by 18 men. For the most decorated platoon of World War II. The monument is modest. The action was not. The German soldiers who faced the 394th INR platoon on December 16, 1944, left their own record of what the experience was like, in the operational accounts of the 3rd Parachute Division and in the post-war testimony of officers who survived. The consistent theme in these accounts was bewilderment. A German soldier had written before the offensive that the American infantryman doesn't attack without aircraft and tanks. He's too cowardly for that. Another German soldier wrote, "The American infantryman isn't worth a penny." This opinion of the American soldier would soon be changed by the actions of the troops of Lieutenant Lyle Bouck's 394th INR platoon. The 9th Parachute Regiment, attacking with 500 men against what their intelligence had assessed as a thinly held sector, found itself unable to advance for an entire day against a force they could not accurately assess or effectively suppress. The post-battle accounting, 92 confirmed casualties, potentially more, from a force of 18 defenders, represented a casualty ratio that German infantry doctrine of 1944 did not expect from American forces of any description.
Bouck's platoon had held up the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Peiper of the 1st SS Panzer Division, preventing a force of over 5,000 men from advancing for 8 crucial hours. 5,000 men held for 8 hours by 18. Or, as the Germans discovered when they searched the woods and found an empty ridgeline, less than a platoon had stopped them.
Lyle Bouck's 21st birthday was December 17, 1944. He spent it as a German prisoner of war in a cafe in Lanzerath with 14 of his wounded men around him. He spent the next 5 months as a prisoner, convinced he had failed. He spent the next 37 years waiting for recognition that never came, until he wrote enough letters and made enough calls that a congressional hearing finally acknowledged what his platoon had done. He spent the rest of his life insisting that the credit belonged to his men, not to him. That Alex Kershaw, writing the definitive account of the action, would not talk to him unless he promised that he'd also write about the other men, not just Bouck himself. The platoon that held Lanzerath Ridge for a day bought time they didn't know they were buying, for a battle they couldn't see, as part of an offensive they had no full picture of. They held because they were told to hold. They held because their training made them capable of holding. They held because Lyle Bouck, 20 years old and 1 day from his birthday, had built a position that 500 German paratroopers could not reduce. 18 men, 500 paratroopers, 92 German casualties, 1 American killed, 18 hours of delay, 37 years before recognition. The most decorated platoon in the history of the United States Army in World War II.